Hello, I'm Nigel Day and I'm Product Manager for Polyhedra, Enea's family of relational database management systems. I'd like to show you a short demonstration of the ADO.NET data provider for Polyhedra by first installing Polyhedra and its data provider on a Windows 10 machine and then building and running the example that is contained in the standard Polyhedra release kit. The Polyhedra release kit is provided as a zip file containing a folder whose name indicates the release version. And I've got into the habit of putting this into a folder called C::Polyhedra, as this allows me to decide which version of Polyhedra I want to run. While the file is unpacking, I'll show you a couple of extra files that I find useful. The first is a batch file that adds the folder containing the Polyhedra executables into the command path of a shell. And the second fires off this batch file in a new command shell and leaves it running. Once the release kit has been unpacked, I can drop a copy of these two files into a new folder, and they allow me to easily open a shell that will use this particular release of Polyhedra. So let's just fire up a command shell using this Windows shortcut and navigate to a folder containing one of the example databases that are provided in each Polyhedra release kit and described in our evaluation guide. I can start up the database server in its own shell by using start rtrdb and then inspect the database using our sqlc program. In this case, there's a table called currency, and I can look at this contents of this table using a select statement and then use the update statement to alter the values in the table. Now let's turn to the ADO.NET data provider for Polyhedra, first introduced in Polyhedra 9.0. First, I need to unpack its release kit into the same place that I unpacked the main release kit. So again, we have a zip file with inside that a directory called Poly 9.0 in this case. And when I unpack this, I'll get warnings saying that I'm overwriting certain directories and certain files. Don't worry about this. The files are the same, they're being overwritten the same in both release kits. Next, using a File Explorer, I can navigate to the folder containing our ADO.NET example and open the Visual Studio solution file. Once Visual Studio is started up, I shall tell it to build a release version of the executable rather than a debug version, and also, since I'm working on a 32-bit version of Windows 10, I shall tell it to build it for x86 rather than a 64-bit platform. I can then instruct Visual Studio to build from source the complete executable. The output of the build is shown in this window down the bottom left-hand corner, and I'll end up with a line saying that the build has succeeded. At this stage, I can now drop out of Visual Studio and then navigate to the directory that will contain the binary file that I have just created. If I double-click on the polydemo.exe file, my demo application will start up, and I'll actually go back and produce another copy of the demo. So now we have two windows containing forms looking at the contents of the currency table, and I'll use a built-in feature of the demo to tweak the value of one of the fields. When I hit the save button, look at the other window and you'll see the value is immediately being changed to the same value through the database. To show this a bit more clearly, I'll set off one of our example programs called Animate, which will repeatedly alter all the values of the table about once a second. And so you can see the changes to the database being reflected through to the application in both the windows we have here through active queries. There is more information on more fully installing our data provider, for example to add it to the globally assembly cache or to register it for use with the DB provider factory class in the reference manual.